Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 77 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, PSCU proudly supports the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Cathie Mahon. Cathie is the president and CEO of Inclusiv. Cathie is someone that I've met many times over the years traveling around credit unions, but never really had a chance to sit down and have a longer conversation. After this one, I sure hope this isn't our last. This was a blast getting to know Cathie better, and I look forward to talking to her more going forward. We talked about a lot, including the work that Inclusiv is doing and how important community development credit unions are from coast to coast, not only in this pandemic, but always, quite honestly. Cathie talked about the amazing work being done and the opportunities for credit unions going forward, as many have shined during this experience that we're all sharing called COVID-19. The leadership section of this show is just fantastic. Cathie shared a lot of the lessons that she learned along the way, whether that was from working in credit unions or working in the Bloomberg administration. And she shared, a ton of these lessons with us that I think we're going to find quite a bit that we can all learn from. I found myself nodding my head over and over as she was talking, so that's always a good sign. And as always, we had some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. I absolutely loved her book recommendations. Two were a couple of my favorites and one that she now has added to my list. And she had a great story about getting into trouble in high school, which made me smile and laugh. I enjoyed this conversation. I really do think you will too. Again, I look forward to being able to move about this country again and hope my path crosses with Cathie again very soon to continue this conversation in person. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Cathie Mahon. Enjoy. Cathie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Randy. I'm excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you. I am a fan. I love the work you and your team do at Inclusiv. So I was glad we got to take this time during these interesting times we're all living through. So first of all, how are you? How's everyone holding up?
We're okay. Yeah. We've had a rough couple weeks, but we're getting through it and just happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, just to jump into the questions, a global pandemic, that seems to be a new one for most of us. But this was something that I've been thinking about quite a bit from even just reading the news from, say, some other financial institutions pulling away from Main Street, let's just call it. How are community development credit unions situated to help members during this interesting experience we're all sharing?
Yeah, great question. I think this pandemic has really illustrated how critical it is to have community development credit unions serving communities in need, because they not only are sort of uniquely situated to be able to respond to and immediately address presenting issues that their members are coming in with, but in many cases, they're kind of the only financial institution that is there for so much of the population in their communities.
Before credit unions, I actually worked on the dark side for a little while, and I grew up in Metro Detroit, and one of the banks that I actually worked for, they were the first bank outside of Detroit, the city proper. And at that time, Detroit was basically it was a ghost town as far as financial institutions and grocery stores and things like that. And I know now there's more credit unions that have come into that area that have community charters and are doing great stuff. So I couldn't agree with you more. It's something I've been thinking a lot about. The next question that I had was, and it kind of ties into this, is what have been the biggest challenges for credit unions that are helping, let's say, the low income member? To me, those are the people that need this most today. We look at the unemployment numbers. We know the numbers. Most people don't have a safety net. So, I guess, what are the challenges that they're seeing? And if you want to share some of the good work they're doing, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, great. I think You hit on it exactly right. The members that the community development credit unions are serving, they tend to be folks who have, minimum wage or low wage jobs. Oftentimes they have multiple jobs that they've been patching together to try to make ends meet in a normal kind of healthy economy. And so when you add to those kinds of fragile dynamics in a household financial situation, all of a sudden you add in a pandemic where half of the workers in the family or half of the jobs go away. Some of the jobs that do remain are some of the most challenging jobs. They end up being essential workers and therefore, are unable to be working from home remotely, have to be going out, have to be engaging or putting their health at risk. So I think what the credit unions have really been seeing is there's a combination of, major shocks to the household budgets just from lost jobs. There's a lot of fear and concern about illness, about getting sick, about getting this virus. And yet there's a need that so many of these folks feel to have to continue to keep those jobs and have to be able to try to keep some money coming into the household. So they're juggling a lot. The credit unions have been incredibly responsive. Everything from day one, the community development credit unions in our network, almost across the board have done everything they can to keep branch operations open.
Yep.
Now they needed to reduce a bit the hours. And in cases where they could, try to manufacture some form of drive-through or some form of way, that they could be serving folks from a distance. But the reality is that a lot of them are in, communities like, with street level access, no drive-throughs, no ability to do remote service. So they've been very thoughtful about the kinds of security protocols and the safety protocols they have to put in place to limit the number of people in the branches at any time, but they recognize that their members need access to their funds and to their accounts. So they've maintained branch operations to the extent possible. They've navigated, we've been using a lot, helping them really bring in a lot of different tools for remotely opening accounts, helping people learn how to use things like the mobile banking apps that were there, but maybe people weren't so comfortable using it, and now trying to really push as many folks as possible. And many folks do want to try to learn it and get on to mobile banking apps and online banking systems. So on the service side, it's really been about helping people navigate, but always know that they have access to their money if they need it. Then there's on the loan side, you can't make loan payments. So, there's been skip-a-pays, there's been loan forbearance, and probably, most significantly, the credit unions have dug in and started doing relief loans. They know that people need the money. And so they're finding ways to do small dollar loans to sort of tide them over.
This sometimes sounds bad saying, but it's such an opportunity for credit unions to be there. People will remember who helped, right? Like in this time. So, I mean, that for us as a movement overall, it to me seems like there's I keep thinking to myself, like, credit unions are built for this, right? Like, so it's interesting you say that. I just, a personal story. I was talking to my mother, who's been a lifelong credit union member, and she was like, I don't know how to do like where I can deposit checks without going to the branch. And she listens to this podcast, so she's probably going to be like, I can't believe you told that story. But it's she
not alone.
No, she texts me every Monday telling me how nice people seem. So but she I went on her credit union's website and found they actually had a great video and everything like that. But to me, another friend was just talking about that they bought their 93-year-old mother an iPad so that she could Zoom with the family and things like that. And it's had me thinking, like, do you think this will change the way that members interact with the credit union going forward?
Yes, I do think this is going to be a big push for more folks interacting digitally and electronically. And I think it's a big push for credit unions to step up their plans to put in more and more of the technological access points. So, for example, we've been working with a number of our network members around just fast forwarding the remote account opening, which became so important when Congress passed the CARES Act. It included the stimulus payments for households that were most impacted, or, for actually across the board for households with lost income. If you didn't have an existing account number with the IRS, you had the opportunity to go online and register a routing number and account number, but you needed to be able to get an account open in order to do it. And so we've been helping many of our members who always had this idea of how do you do remote account opening for an unbanked individual, right? It's a little bit more complex. There's some more compliance issues. You have to have a variety of different ways to test the know your customer and be safe on BSA and be in compliance. So there's extra steps involved when you're talking about enrolling folks in accounts who are unbanked individuals. So there has been a lot of that stepping up, and I think it's positioning us better moving forward to be much more aggressive in reaching out to each and every household out there that could possibly access us to be able to do so.
So this is a question I've asked since the podcast began, and I was actually very excited to ask you this one. Do you think there is something that credit unions kind of fundamentally need to change to stay relevant? I mean, we've kind of just been talking about it, but the pace of change in financial services, even before this pandemic, was unbelievable. Do you think there's something that we either need to do better, need to push forward?
I think what the pandemic is revealing is that I think there were a lot of folks who believed there's sort of this silver bullet out there in fintech, that, fintech is disrupting banking and there's going to be, whole new ways of doing business that don't require any boots on the ground, any brick and mortar, any presence in communities. And I think this is revealing that there's a role for fintech.
Yep.
There certainly is obvious opportunities and needs for technology to be the facilitator. But at the end of the day, it's more important now than ever that there are local connection points. And so similar to what you said before is, this is a great opportunity to show what credit unions are all about, because people will remember who was there for them. And, the reality is we saw this most recently in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, when the entire cooperative credit union network was up and running within 48 hours of Maria hitting that island. And it took banks weeks and months to open their branches because people in those branches did not live in those communities, and people making decisions about that access to branches were not in those communities. And so I feel like this is at the national level very similar to what we saw post-Maria, which is at the end of the day, we need a lot with technology, but we also need those connection points because people now more than ever, they need guidance. They need to ask people, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I navigate? And we can do some of that remotely, but they need to know we're there in their communities, that we're part of this. We're going through it along with them.
You talking about Puerto Rico after Maria, I happened to just +1 because at one of the events you had down there, I was down there with Jill and Pablo, and she was speaking at something that you did, and I was just like, oh, why wouldn't I come to Puerto Rico? But it was amazing to see not only how all the credit union cooperatives came together, but even just the cooperative community overall. I thought that was fantastic. And sometimes that seems to be something that the cooperatives cooperating with other cooperatives seems to be missed sometimes. So I absolutely loved seeing that.
I do think it helps to educate us all about the value of that cooperative economy.
Absolutely.
It is truly wonderful down there.
Oh, that's fantastic. I can't wait to travel again and get back. So, the last question in this section, if we were to sit down a year from now, if you had to break out the crystal ball, and I know things are changing extremely rapidly, but what are you most proud of that you and your team at Inclusiv have accomplished over the next year?
So I think I will be most proud of the fact that during this crisis and beyond, we have built and maintained a true and robust network. very early on, we decided, like this is the moment where you really value a network, right? We have over 300 members in communities around the country that are kind of feeling like they're doing this on their own. They're in it, and they're doing everything they can, but it can feel really isolating and really lonely. And I feel like we decided immediately that people needed to feel like they're part of something bigger. They need to hear from each other. They need to know that what they're trying over here in Massachusetts, somebody else is trying over there in Southern California, or, and how to learn from that, how to understand that. And they also need to know that they're part of something bigger and their value is multiplying.
Yeah.
And so I think that feeling, that's the power of a network, that's where you start realizing that impacts can become exponential. So the little work you're doing in one space can have exponential impacts across the whole network, because you're not only doing something, you're helping others to learn and do it as well. So I hope a year from now, when I look back, that I'm going to be most proud of this testing us a bit and challenging the strength of that network, and that we came through with a much more focused purpose about what does that mean to be a network. One other thing that I will look back on and be proud of, and this is broader for the movement, which is I think we have right now shown what it means to have community development lenders, community development financial institutions, community financial institutions as a vibrant part of our economy. And I think lawmakers see that now. I think the failures in the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. Yep.
It has illustrated the gaps in our financial system and the value that we bring as community-based lenders. And I think the visibility we will have raised in these moments by exceeding any expectations of what could be accomplished by the community lenders will be hopefully transformative for our whole economy.
Oh, I can tell you, even some of the small business owner friends I have who maybe didn't look at credit unions before because they didn't think of them as being that, through the PPP, many did. And many ended up because they were just put into a queue with some of the larger national banks that they maybe had a relationship with for decades at the time, but it was, so I think there's stories across the board like that.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And the experience of the PPP program, you had sort of, the press coming out saying, the banks are only lending to their customers, and which was true. And then you had the banks in defense of themselves saying, well, we had to be able to do due diligence. We had to be prudent. And so it was like both sides are correct. It shows that they weren't serving huge swaths of our population to begin with.
Absolutely.
And that, so it really did reveal, I think, what we've been saying all along is that we go where the banks can't and won't, and we should own that.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. I'd like to move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. And to start with, what inspired you to take the gig as president and CEO of Inclusiv?
Oh, so, I'd been involved with credit unions for many, many years. And back in the 90s, I had worked at what Inclusiv used to be was the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions. And I worked for about 5 years as the director of policy and program development there. And then I went on and I left the role at the Federation. I remained always active with credit unions on boards, involved in informing credit unions, involved in running credit unions, in leading credit unions from a board perspective. So it was a little bit of a life comes full circle moment. I had gone on, I started a small business, and then I went to work in city government in the Bloomberg administration here in the city of New York. I ran something called the Office of Financial Empowerment, where we worked with low-income New Yorkers around issues of financial empowerment. And so when Cliff Rosenthal, my predecessor at Federation, told me that he was thinking about retiring, I thought, this is this is life showing me there is a path, even though it seems like I've been all over the place. There's a clear path I've been going. And
oh, I love that. That's a great story. I did not realize that. I guess if I knew, I'd forgotten that you had been with the Federation beforehand for a time. So that kind of fits right into this next question. If you think back to your experience when you were working with Cliff, and then if you think back to taking the job as CEO, has the inspiration at all changed now that you're leading the show?
Yes, it has. I have to say, when I came in, the mission has remained the same.
Right.
So I have always been most inspired by the mission and the work of the Federation and what was the Federation and is now Inclusiv. And I've always been incredibly inspired by the example and the leadership of the community development credit unions. So that has not changed. But, when you go from working in an organization to leading it, things do change.
Yeah.
You do start thinking about what is the direction that I want to shape for this organization and what is the vision that I can uniquely bring. I think, the fact that I had spent a good amount of time in city government and a good amount of time running financial empowerment programming, it enabled me to bring that lens to the work of the community development credit unions and really the passion to try to do as much as I can to help our members. There's so much work to be done to just run a compliant, successful credit union that it can sometimes be hard to lift your head up and look at the world around you or even the community around you and think about who's out here in my space who can help me do more and do better. So I feel like some of that inspiration that's sort of shifted has come really from how can I help be that bridge that helps our members be able to look up and say, we don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of potential partners and a lot of good opportunities that can lift our institution together.
Oh, I like that. Is there something that your team has heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Probably the perfect is the enemy of the good. That is my mantra on everything. I want to make sure we are not so careful and so cautious that we don't get things out in real time,
Another meeting is not always the option, right? Or maybe the best course of action. So I'm with you on that.
Let's get it out there. Let's throw it against the wall. Let's see what happens. And let's not kill ourselves to be perfect always.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. Sometimes as a leader, and this kind of goes back to the previous question about the inspiration changing, there's early on starting this podcast, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to the more CEO thought leaders was it can be lonely at the top, right? You're in your own position between staff and the board, and it's you. And something that I added this season was this idea that sometimes we have to make a difficult decision. And it might not be popular all the time. We'd love to bring consensus all the time, but it's looking forward at the longer term goal. Is that something that you've always had the ability to do, to make the call, make the tough decision, or is that something that you've had to cultivate in yourself over your career?
It's the latter. I have not always had it. So I would say, making difficult decisions, going with it, is probably the hardest thing to do as a leader because there's so much you're weighing. There's so much you're responsible and accountable for. There's always going to be risk involved. And it can be very paralyzing. I have to say, I think having worked in the Bloomberg administration was very helpful for me in a couple of ways. I had always been prior to that, I had spent most of my career either in the nonprofit space or sort of running a very small business. And I think moving into that environment, there was a couple things that got drilled into me, which is don't be afraid to fail. The only failure is not trying. And if you're not doing things, then we have a problem. But don't be afraid to fail. And their interest, and it was the leaderships really throughout that administration that felt like we learn more when we try and fail than if we don't do. And so if it works, great, let's run with it. And if it doesn't work, sit down and tell us exactly why you think that didn't work. It reframes your thinking about risk.
Yeah. And failure.
All of a sudden, risk and failure and failure. And, it takes risk and failure off the table. It's not about you. You're not going to be, you're not going to be saddled with something for the rest of your life that you tried and failed. And it's about what you do with that failure and how you're learning and how you're growing and how you're sharing and tracking. You're also big into, data tracking and measurement. So you take a lot, you track a lot of data and you do a lot of analysis. It's not like you try something and go, oh, well, it failed. I'll try something else. You got to say it failed for the following reasons. Here's what I think we need to do next. So it takes risk off the table a little bit. And I think that's, as humans, we all kind of need to trust a bit more in ourselves and give ourselves some space to not always get things perfect.
Is there a common myth about being a good leader that you would like to debunk?
Yes, I think one of the things I've learned is, you don't always know where the end point is. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of emphasis in leadership that, see where you're going to go and work back from there. And that's certainly as a thought process, very important. But you're not going to always know the end point. Or if you wait for knowing exactly where that end point is, you're not going to move. And so I think I'd like to debunk the myth that you need to know exactly where this is going to go. I think that it's like the 3-year versus the 5-year strategic plan, right? Like I can figure it out for 3 years, but coming up 5 years, let's be honest, I'm not sure where we're going to be in 5 years, but I'm still going to shoot for something.
My guess was 3 to 5 years ago, none of us were strategic planning a global pandemic. So I've heard so many CEOs go, yeah, that's out the window this year. So we'll readjust, right? Like so.
Exactly.
When you think back to earlier in your career, or even with like young leaders that you've worked with, is there a mistake you made or a common mistake you see young leaders make?
Yes, I think for what I do and what I sometimes see others I'm working with do is when you've spent a lot of years on implementation and operations, it can be really difficult to step back and trust. When you move into a management role, you're not supposed to figure it all out and then explain it all to the person and have them go do that blueprint. You have to try to pull yourself out and just trust in the team that you're building and the team that you're assembling, and just trust that they're going to figure it out. It's going to be different. And that is a challenge I've had. It's a challenge I continue to have.
I am with you on that.
But it's a constant life learning that I'm really trying to take seriously.
I've talked with others on the podcast about that. Is part of sometimes moving up in the ranks is because you put your head down and you do a great job and you do the work, and then that becomes our go-to. Is if there's a problem, well, I'll fix it instead of, and I remember I was at a CUIs conference years ago, and one of the keynotes, and I wish I could remember the fella's name because I've mentioned this before, but I don't remember what his name was. But, he mentioned about asking the question when a problem comes up of saying, what would you do? Back, and then it might not be the same thing but instead of just jumping into answer fix it mode, and that was something I still struggle with to this day, but it still resonates with me.
So true.
One of the things that I noticed on the first season of the podcast was how many people brought up mentors. Have you had mentors coming up through your career, and how have they affected helping you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have some amazing mentors. as I mentioned before, I'd say principal among them is my predecessor, Cliff Rosenthal. He built an organization over 40 years. He built a movement. He built a sense of connection and a culture of committed and passionate commitment to mission. And I learned a lot, as a mentor. I think he really helped instill in me how important it was to both have your own passion and mission, but also respect the work on the ground, the work that your members are doing. So, he was huge among them. I'd say Jonathan Mintz, who is my former boss at New York City. He was commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. He had a great management style. He made it a lot of fun to work together. He created a sense of team unity by people just liking to come to work, wanting to come to work. And so that helped to really, I think about that a lot. But then there's people within, the movement, people like Sheila Montgomery, who I've seen, wear so many different hats, fix so many problem situations, dive in the most challenging moments, and with sheer, joy, take on hard, thorny issues and make them just really, really turn around. So I watch people like her, people like Linda Milton, who runs Team Financial in Houston, who just sort of, is thoughtful, is respectful, is focused, and, gets the job done. There's just so many that I watch and try to learn from, and, try to take little pieces of them back with me when I'm doing it.
We are lucky to be a part of such an amazing movement of people and one of the things that I absolutely love about the credit union community is the willingness to share, right? Sheila's an excellent example of every interaction I have with her. I absolutely love. So, I want to be respectful of your time, but before we move on to the last section of the show, if you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what does Cathie do to unwind? What does that work-life integration look like to you?
So ideally, this is like, in an ideal world, a free day, yoga, a little bit of yoga, kind of chill out and feel good about myself and my body and all that. I love to run. I love to bike. We're lucky I'm in Brooklyn. I'm close to Prospect Park, so I can bike up there on a good day and, just really kind of feel like I'm getting away. I love to go to the beach and then coming home, getting a cup of coffee and curling up with a good book or the newspaper. That's a good day.
Get outside and then chill. I like it. The last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. What was Cathie like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got in memorable trouble?
Well, it's funny, the second part of that question, because the first part I was going to say, I was a bit of a troublemaker in high school. I was very independent, as my mother used to say. I didn't want to sort of toe the line and follow the path of my siblings. So I was quite independent. I got into quite a bit of trouble. I think probably, I can't even tell you necessarily the first time I got into trouble, but I will say I lived in the suburbs north of New York. And I could remember one night at about 2 a.m. in a car full of friends that were driving me home from some party I probably shouldn't have been at. And a car comes barreling down the street and everyone looks up and says, "Oh my God, it's Mr. Man." My dad had been driving around for hours looking for me. And so I had this moment where the cars stopped and I had to get out of my friend's car and walk over to my dad's car. And it was that longest mile of, walking across the Bridge of Spies, where you're just ready to be shot. So, we had quite a few times where I'm sure I had many sleepless nights for my parents.
For the parents, yeah, I was similar, so I understand that completely. Most of us stumbled into a career in credit unions. When you were young, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, Randy, I wanted to be a journalist, doing much like what you do. So, yeah, when I was little, I had I was given, I don't know, maybe on my 8th birthday, a tape recorder with a microphone. And so I used to set up in my bedroom, kind of my TV show that I was, that I would do. And I would invite in guests. So my siblings and our neighbor, all the neighbors came in, and at different points in time would be guests on my show, and I would interview them. And I had at the time, it was the time of the Iran hostage crisis. So I had my little brother be the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I was
that's awesome.
Interviewing him.
Oh my gosh. So, wow. That's amazing. I feel like there could be a podcast here in your future. You should do your own. You could relive your childhood dream and interview people. So that's fantastic. Wait, so you were 8 interviewing the Ayatollah Khomeini?
Who was like 6.
Right.
So,
who was 6 at the time. Okay.
So his responses were quite bizarre.
Yeah, that's okay. That's actually making my face hurt. I'm laughing about that. That's awesome. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off?
Yes. I love my mornings. I walk my dog in the morning. I take a nice long walk. I often listen to podcasts. So, big plug for podcasts while walking dogs in the mornings, and come in, get my coffee, listen to a little NPR. That's a good morning. And then at nights is my family time. That's when I'm, spending time with my husband and my son, and we do a lot of fun things together.
That's good. I am also a big podcast listener, probably unsurprising, when I take the dog for a walk. So the random question, what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
So I would say it's a toss-up between London Calling by The Clash and Get Happy by Elvis Costello. I love the Get Happy album.
We grew up in a similar time, I'm assuming. So I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in our house. You mentioned reading earlier on that perfect day. Is there a book that either you've gifted to others or that book that you just think everybody should read?
Yes. I'd say the book I've gifted the most to others is probably The Motorcycle Diaries, but I would say something everybody should read is 100 Years of Solitude.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of that book got me into reading more, like reading nonfiction and things like after college. Wow. Yeah. Good.
But I will say recently I just finished a book called Say Nothing.
Okay.
So if you're looking for good ones, it's actually about the IRA and the troubles in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. It's amazing. It's an amazing story.
You just added to my book list the first 2 I had, so and are 2 of my favorites actually. So, as you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question: what's become less important?
So, more important, I would say, is trying to figure out balance. Enjoying. Really being able to enjoy time off, taking the time and having a good balance, not making our mission and drive everything. And I think what's become less important is not that work has become less important, but I think trying to just realize that you're not going to solve everything all at once. I think somebody recently said, about this pandemic, and it's true for anything we're working on, is it's a marathon, not a sprint. Take your time, do what you need to do to be ready for the long haul. So
absolutely. That balance is ever elusive, but always something to strive for. That's for sure. There's a question that I didn't send you. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
For some reason, I just, Bill Clinton came to mind.
Okay. How come?
Bill Clinton. I don't know. I think he's an example of maybe a successful leader, somebody who's not needing to be the smartest person in the room who loves to surround himself by smart people and thoughtful ideas? I'm not so sure. I know I've been very impressed with the stuff that the Clinton Global Initiative's been doing. So,
yeah.
But yeah, he popped into my mind.
That's why I don't send the question.
I don't know if that would have been the answer if I didn't prepare.
I'm always impressed with the presidents that after they're out of office still use their influence to do something great or good, right? So I'm with you on the Clinton Global Initiative. Thank you again, Cathie, for being on the show and sharing your story. My last question for you is, do you have any final asks or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, just I think other than stay safe, stay together, stay healthy, keep doing what you're doing, and, give yourself the time and the support that you need to make it happen.
That is the perfect way to end it. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. What's the best way for people to reach you if they have additional questions of you? LinkedIn, the Twitter machine, email? What's your poison, I guess?
LinkedIn would be the best.
Right.
I'm most active on LinkedIn, and I love connecting to folks in the movement.
We will link that in the show notes as well. Thank you again, Cathie. Please stay safe and healthy, and I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you.
Before we go, I would like to take a moment to thank all of you. A huge thank you from all of us for listening. We wouldn't be able to do with what we do without your support, and we greatly appreciate it every day. And once again, to thank Cathie for taking the time out of her busy schedule, and a big thank you to our sponsor, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been longtime partners and supporters of us at CUInsight, so please make sure to click on their link in the show notes and give them some love, see everything they have going on to help the credit union community. Also, if you could, check us out on all the different podcast players out there, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. You name it, we're on it. We would appreciate if you would subscribe, if you could leave us a 5-star rating, maybe even a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It would greatly help. It helps with the visibility of the show, and we would greatly appreciate it. If you don't think we're worth the 5 stars, you can just forget I asked and maybe send me an email and let me know where we can improve. Shoot me a tweet, whatever you like. And then don't forget about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. We will be adding to that with the recommendations Cathie had. If you need some stimulation of the old mind while continuing to social distance, we've got you covered. Get your next book recommendation from the amazing guests on our show. Thank you all again for listening, and have a great day. Stay healthy, friends.